Hey everybody, this is your daily dose of all things royal.
We believe there is a clear public interest in the release of Prince Harry's immigration records.
Welcome back, my gorgeous good-looking friends. Today's video may be a gut punch to American stomach, but if you care about your freedoms in the Western world, I ask you just to give me the few minutes to listen to what I have to say on why it's so important that those visa records are released to the public for transparency. Harry has admitted to using mind-altering substances, and at the same time, he is in our government interfering with our government policies that affect our constitutional rights. That includes our First Amendment and our Fourth Amendment. So Janelle Allred, as well as many other sugars, wants to know why we care so much. If anything out of this video, pay attention to the next minute, and then you will soon understand why.
Yeah.
I got so much I want to say about the First Amendment. I still don't understand it, but it is bonkers.
And aims to respond to challenges to truth, journalism and democracy. The Duke of Sussex will join 15 commissioners from the political spectrum and deliver a findings report after 60 days.
Former President Barack Obama gave a speech at Stanford in April 2022 that leaned heavily on a report from the Aspen Institute, a left-leaning think tank. In his speech, Obama claimed that unfettered online speech threatens democracy.
He sort of starts with FBI, but DHS, and we've also seen the White House demanding the censorship and the deplatforming of particularly disfavored views and people.
The former president painted a very frightening picture of what our Constitution calls free speech.
At the highest levels of government, all the way up to the Oval Office with President Obama and then Vice President Joe Biden, they were aware not only that there was no predicate for launching this crossfire hurricane investigation into Trump, but in fact they had intelligence and evidence that this was planted by the Hillary Clinton campaign. And what this means, Ainsley, is this is the weaponization of the federal government at the highest levels.
But this is unprecedented in the history of the United States for the federal government to be funding activities aimed at both establishing a predicate, a basis for censorship, and also funding organizations that are directly advocating censorship.
I can see how it can be done. And there's very few people within the world right now who have the evidence and the information that I have to be able to change that.
The federal government is not only not allowed by the First Amendment to censor free speech, it's not allowed to subcontract or contract out or have other people do that work for it. So just funding people to demand censorship itself is a violation of the First Amendment. So
a large part of this mission is to try and change the media landscape.
$40 million has gone to kind of spawn a censorship industrial complex in American universities and think tanks.
You know, my father said to me that it was probably a suicide mission to try and change the press.
The few weaponizing lies and disinformation at the expense of the many. We are witnessing a global assault on democracy and freedom.
And this is why Homeland Security needs to release that information to the American public, because we have a foreign national on U.S. soil interfering with our government. Now that in itself is an attack on our democracy. So Sassy Girl 34 said it best. I don't give two shites about what their children are called, but I do care about Harry trying to interfere with American civil liberties, which is our freedom of speech. And of course, race-baiting Shouty Shola has to add her 2 cents into the mix, but you know what? That's okay. She's entitled to have her own opinion, because that's the beauty of what freedom of speech is about. So as annoying as she is, she's allowed to have that. And I think what the stupid, idiotic sugars fail to understand is that their freedoms to post so-called hate is their opinion. But at some point, if this progresses down the path that it's progressing towards, how are they going to like it when they get censored? Because the day is going to come when it does happen to them. How are they going to like when their voices are taken away? This is not about being right-wing or left-wing. This is about your individual freedom, your God-given rights. No disrespect, Shouty, but you're going to lose this debate. The American public have the right to know, as far as security-wise, that we have a foreign national on U.S. soil who admitted to taking drugs and is influencing our policy. Now, I don't know about you, but I sure don't want someone who is high all the time dictating what my freedoms are. Making sense? I'm paying taxes. I have the right to say that I want to know. So shouting your opinion means dick.
We also want to ensure that there was no preferential treatment given towards Prince Harry. Everyone should be treated equally by the law.
So here's where it stands right now. The Heritage Foundation is going to be in court on June 6th to plead the motion for a preliminary injunction to expedite this case. Now, as this process has been going through, the Homeland Security as well as Border Protection have been pushing back, giving one excuse after another in releasing any kind of information and really dragging their feet on providing the proper information. It is my opinion that if the Heritage Foundation does fail to get this information released as a result of this administration pushing back due to some funny business, allegedly, then I do think that they should be exploring Harry's foreign influence to see if he is breaking federal law, acting as a covert foreign influencer that has unleashed an assault on our democracy from within. Harry and Meghan are actively aligned with people who are working daily to take down our freedom of speech.
Hey, can you tell us a little more about René de Resta and the use of think tanks to utilize and mobilize more censorship, please?
Absolutely. So there's this person named René de Resta. She's very little known. She's often sort of the number 2 person at various organizations.
Now, I hope that that name sounds very familiar to you, but if it doesn't, let me refresh your memory. So in November 2021, Archwell broadcasts and advertises that Prince Harry was participating in this dialogue, or more like a panel, called the Internet Lie Machine. Those participating? Well, you guessed it. René de Resta. Now let's hear a little more about who she is.
In our research, she kept coming up as really the smartest person in the room. She was always the person who was the first to sort of to create justifications for censorship. Her story itself always struck me as kind of fake. She sort of suggested that she was fighting anti-vaxxers online in 2014, but the next thing you know, she's advising the Obama White House on how to fight ISIS. It then came out accidentally because her supervisor at Stanford is sort of slightly clumsier, maybe not as bright as she is. He accidentally revealed that she had been a CIA fellow, and we had badgered her about it. I mentioned it in my testimony. I mentioned Joe Rogan. She felt the need to respond. She confirmed that she's a CIA fellow. So I think she's maybe the most important person on the outside of the censorship industrial complex making the case for greater censorship.
Yeah.
I got so much I want to say about the First Amendment. I still don't understand it, but it is bonkers.
And I would note, they just published an article, just true to form, in Foreign Policy, Renee did with her colleague, called How Gamers Eclipsed Spies as an Intelligence Threat. So now René de Resta is out there making the case for expanded censorship and expanded surveillance of gamer chat rooms. So, of course, and so this is what we're going to see, Russell, is that every new problem for the national security state, every new crisis, whether it's climate change or COVID or a leak of sensitive information, is going to be used as justification by sort of the people on the outside who are ostensibly independent, but have very strong ties with the Pentagon or the CIA. They're going to be using these incidents to demand greater censorship. And that's what she does in Foreign Policy this week. They're constantly trying to create new pretexts or predicates or justifications for censorship. I think the other thing that's come out in our research, Russell, that's super important and really interesting is that they use these national security types, CIA fellows like René de Resta, who use woke language to justify censorship. And at first I would sort of hear it and it seemed incongruous because on the one hand, I associate the woke with more the radical left and extremely progressive, anti-imperialist types. But then you start to hear it coming out of the mouths of people who are also talking about like Russian disinfo and national security. And it always struck me as really incongruous. And then I started to understand that really it's been going on for a while. There's all sorts of organizations that talk about countering digital hate. And so you see it all the time. There's a group in Britain that's called the Institute for Strategic Dialogue that's targeting climate denialism, including Jordan Peterson, Bjorn Lomborg, myself. It's countering hate. So they're using racism online, they're using climate denialism online as justifications for censorship. The other thing I would note, Russell, is that we started seeing a pattern where there was basically a set of countries, the United States, Britain at the heart of it, but also New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. And somebody pointed out, because I'm sort of new to this space, someone pointed out, they go, oh, well, that's the Five Eyes intelligence and spying network that's existed since World War II. That network of surveillance, one of the characteristics of it is that the countries, because they can't spy on their own citizens without violating their constitutions, so they spy on each other's citizens and then they share the information with each country. That's been going on for decades. Now they're doing it with censorship. So it's the British think tank that's attacking me. It's the Australians who's attacking us. And then similarly, our people attacking Brits and Australians. So the same thing that they had been doing in terms of using each other in these different countries to spy on other people to get around constitutional protections against surveillance, they're now doing the same thing on censorship. So I think those two new things are things to build our resilience against the censors, is to be aware of the ways in which the censors are using wokeism, they're tapping into preventing real world harm is one of the things they say as a main justification for censoring, and they're also using their allies in these other countries.
In a different part of the country, you saw that same pressure from the Washington field office. And did they ever try to get you to do something that was outside the normal order of law enforcement activity?
Yes, sir.
And what did the Washington field office try to get you to do that violated the law and regulations?
They tried to get me to serve a federal grand jury subpoena when there was no proper predicate to do so.
And the reason there was no predicate was because it was based on an anonymous tip, right?
That's correct.
And time and again, the Washington field office was trying to pressure you without corroboration to go start process on people. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
And so while I agree that January 6th was a violent day, a bad day, a day that nobody wants to relive, violence on January 6th doesn't justify weaponizing the government against people who were innocent and did nothing wrong. Thank you for blowing the whistle on that.
I warned him that his platform was allowing a coup to be staged. That email was sent the day before, and then it happened, and I haven't. This election, I'm not going to be able to vote here in the US. As we approach this November, it's vital that we reject hate speech, misinformation, and online negativity.
It is my hope that the Heritage Foundation does weave in getting an answer as to how did Harry know about January 6th, considering there was a lot of funny business going on behind the scenes, clearly now coming out. The journalists that criticize Meghan and Harry on a daily basis, GB News, Sky News, where are you on this? These two are working behind the scenes to brainwash the youth in this woke ideology that is destroying our society, all for their profit. I bet no one has realized that Archwell has attached itself to another lawsuit. So NetChoice is a nonprofit organization that is suing the state of California. So NetChoice is taking this to federal court for declaratory and injunctive relief from a recently passed law known as Assembly Bill 2273, the Age Appropriate Design Code Act. It just so happened Archwell and a whole bunch of these NGOs that have been trying to censor speech online have also attached themselves to helping defend California in this law. And what this law is about is that it's a careless attempt to control online speech, and it threatens minors' privacy and safety. It steamrolls the First Amendment and conflicts with federal law. This law merely expands government power over online speech under the guise of protecting kids. Of course, no shocker there that Meghan and Harry would be in support of this bill. So this lawsuit, NetChoice versus Bonta, explains that AB 2273 violates the First Amendment many times over. It compels and chills speech, infringes editorial rights, limits adults' access to constitutional speech, and relies on undefined terms to grant California unchecked power to coerce moderation decisions the government prefers. California is expanding government control over online speech by using children's privacy as a front. AB 2273 isn't actually focused on privacy, it's focused on regulating online content. Some of the things mentioned in this court case on what this law is allowing to happen is that the state of California is actually violating the First Amendment and privacy of families online. This is what the lawsuit says. AB 2273 instructs sites on how to manage constitutionally protected speech, not how to ensure child safety online. This bill or this legislation that was passed undermines children's privacy by forcing sites, regardless of how secure they are, to track and store information identifying which users are minors. Users will need to turn over far more personal data just to visit a website, creating more sensitive data that can be targeted by child predators and hackers, or people like at Archwell, who keeps mining data and selling it to third parties. It also violates the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution, and California risks closing off the open internet, hindering innovation and creating a patchwork of inconsistent laws governing online speech. And the worst thing about this bill is that it's actually taking away the parents' rights now to decide how their families use the internet, engage with online content. This is very dangerous because now you're taking away the parents' freedom and putting it into the hands of the state to decide what content kids or minors are able to access and see, and information that they will be taking and using for whatever purpose. I would like to ask you out there, if you're a parent and this is happening, are you okay with that? I think that's very concerning, especially since we know that Meghan and Harry are like exploiters of anything that's vulnerable. How many of you guys really want these two influencing the youth? Again, I say that these two are on a mission and have been grooming the youth in order to get in line and adopt this ideology that is so destructive. And we're seeing this happen in our society. The movement that they have been pushing and rallying up the youth into taking action really is causing this whole society to collapse. So enough with these bullshit headlines, because this is not the important stuff that we have to worry about. And here's my final thought on what I believe went down with this visa situation and where I see it possibly going. So let's remember that Harry and Meghan went to Canada in March of 2020. Nobody knew that they were sneaking away to California. So at that point, when they were fleeing for their lives due to the borders being closed, does anybody believe that Harry filled out any paperwork to get into the country? One would think that you would have to fill out paperwork in advance in order to get a visa. Now, let's remember that the couple allegedly weren't targeting California. They were trying to stay in a Commonwealth country. But since security and their status was going to be pulled away at the end of March, they made a mad dash to California. Harry had his diplomatic passport or card or whatever his identification is, and he had smooth sailing into the country. Now, if you really think about it, and you go back to that memorable Oprah interview, Meghan had stated they took her passport, they took her keys. We all know that that was BS. But maybe, as we've always said, that Meghan always adds a little dash of truth somewhere in those big fat lies. What if the palace took away her diplomat card or diplomat passport, and she was left with her regular passport? Remember, the palace didn't know that Harry was in California. They were thinking, well, he's in Canada, it's still Commonwealth and under our jurisdiction. We don't need to collect all the information from him now. We'll figure out paperwork, as we go along. But going over to the United States, nobody was there to confiscate his diplomat information. And I'm sure that crossing into the United States, they have no idea what they're looking at. They see Prince Harry and they're like, oh yeah, there's his ID. Come on in. And then we went into lockdown, and all of a sudden now there really is no reason to go ahead and file this paperwork or get a new ID. And if his ID that he had been using wasn't expired, I can honestly see Harry thinking, I don't want to give this up because it still gives me access or certain privileges in the United States regarding travel. I could easily see how this could fall through the cracks. And then when Harry went back to the UK, it was like a year later where he was with his family going to Prince Philip's funeral. So I highly doubt going into the UK anybody was giving him any trouble. And hypothetically, even if he was questioned at the border in the UK as to where is your new visa or ID, he could have easily have said that the United States processing was taking longer than normal because of the COVID situation. And I highly doubt that the palace was keeping tabs on whether or not he had his paperwork together because technically he left the company. And it would explain why one U.S. government agency that is supposed to be handling like the biometrics, like fingerprints and photos, has no file or record of Prince Harry. And honestly, why would the Heritage Foundation have Prince Harry's alien number, his fingerprint identification number, or a completed fingerprint card from the requester? Like, something doesn't seem right here because in the correspondence between the Heritage Foundation, Border Patrol, and Homeland Security, and then now this Office of Biometrics, it all seems like they're covering up something and maybe the process wasn't completed or paperwork wasn't filled out and it just fell through the cracks. And because of who Prince Harry is, nobody bothered to follow up or even think to check his file to see if he is here legally. I'm guessing everybody was assuming that everything was legit and then transfer over into the new administration, because let's not forget that when Prince Harry came to this country, he was under a different administration. So I could see some finger pointing going on if it does come out that there is missing elements to his visa application, if any at all. This could potentially put a bigger spotlight on if, let's say, the protocol wasn't followed and he's in this country without paperwork and nobody bothered to follow up with, then that will bring a spotlight now on Homeland Security and the current administration and what they're doing at our borders and who they're letting into our country. I mean, it already is a hot topic, but it's just going to be exacerbated considering now you have this element of a very well-known privileged elite and potentially all the checks and balances had not been followed. We're just going to have to wait and see. And the annoying thing about this is Harry is now costing the American taxpayer in this court case. In my opinion, I think it's money well spent considering they're wasting it elsewhere. So I'm hoping that the Heritage Foundation does succeed, because if they do, there is one form that I think is going to be very important to all us royal watchers. And that's going to be the log of Harry's arrival and departures, which in that log, it should state how many people were with him and who was with them. So if it is his wife and 2 children, I believe that information will be put into the system. I'm sure you know where this is going. This log is important because we'll be able to confirm whether or not they have 2 children and that they do exist. If it is confirmed that they were traveling with them, then we know in some form that there is 2 little beings running around under the care of these 2 degenerates. If not, then you know that that's going to be a whole nother can of worms that's going to open up and sprout out all over Meghan. So we'll just have to see. But anyhow, what do you guys think? As you know, this is an important thing that we need to keep in the front of everybody's minds because he is directly undermining our democracy here in the United States, and our government is allowing it. Honestly, he should be deported regardless, and our government needs to stop allowing him anywhere near our military because pretty much he's slapping them in the face by doing this. Anyhow, That's all I have for you today. I kindly ask you to please share this important video. More people need to know and see what is going on. Not many people fully understand it and get it yet, but I'm convinced if we continue to keep talking about it, eventually it will bubble up to a journalist who might want to do a little extra work and take it on and actually do some real journalism. But that's all I have. What do you guys think? Definitely leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe and I will talk to you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.